The year was 1891, and Hollow's Edge, Mississippi, was a town that believed itself forgotten by God. Its people whispered of the night the oak trees bled, when Reverend Silas Morrow vanished during Sunday Vespers. Witnesses claimed the church bells tolled 13 times, though there was no one in the belfry. The next morning, only a single bloody handprint marked the altar, enormous and twisted, as though pressed by a creature not born of man. For decades, the townsfolk told no one. The record was buried, the newspapers burned, and the land quietly sold. But recently, a forgotten diary surfaced in a condemned courthouse. It belonged to a man named Dr. Alaric Penn, a field physician who tended to the enslaved in 1837, more than 50 years before that disappearance. In its brittle pages lay the first mention of her, a woman so tall she cast a shadow across generations. He called her Mara of Claybrook, though others whispered another name, Goliath's daughter. What began as superstition would soon unravel into something far darker, a legacy of violence, silence, and monstrous inheritance. Tonight we reopen the case. Every whisper, every missing record, every burial mound. They point toward one truth. Hollow's Edge was built on something unspeakable, something that refused to die. Mara was born in 1820, on the Claybrook plantation, 30 miles east of Vicksburg. The midwives refused to touch her mother, who labored 3 days in agony before delivering a child larger than most grown men. Her father, a slave named Abram, died 2 weeks later, his body found bent backward at the base of the cotton press. The overseer called it an accident, but every man in the quarters knew otherwise. From infancy, Mara's size defied nature. By 12, she stood over 6 feet. By 16, nearly 7. Her eyes were pale, almost translucent, and her voice, when she spoke, trembled the rafters. The master, a man named Josiah Claybrook, saw her not as human but as spectacle, something to show northern visitors as proof of his dominion. Goliath's blood, he said, laughing, born again on my soil. But whispers told of strange storms that followed her laughter, of animals that would not approach her, of dreams that left the housemaids screaming. One by one they vanished or were sold. No one could say why Mara was spared. Perhaps Claybrook enjoyed his terror. Or perhaps he believed he could control her. He could not. It happened during the drought of 37, when the river dried and hunger stalked the fields. Josiah Claybrook accused Mara of witchcraft after the stillborn death of his infant son. The preacher, a traveling man from Georgia, insisted she be chained and purged through holy pain. Witnesses described the scene, though most denied it later. They said Claybrook struck her across the face with his cane, again and again, until the bones split his own hand. They said she did not cry. When he raised the cane a final time, she caught it mid-swing. The sound that followed was not human, a crack like a tree snapping in a storm. When they found Claybrook's body, his skull was crushed inward by bare hands. The chains were torn from the beams, the walls smeared with blood and scripture. The preacher vanished. Mara fled into the woods, barefoot and laughing. For days, the air reeked of iron and smoke. They said her footprints burned into the clay. The Claybrook plantation was abandoned soon after, its fields swallowed by rot. But those who stayed near the river swore they still heard her cry in the wind, half grief, half triumph, a sound that no prayer could silence. By 1840, Mara's name had been stricken from all records. Claybrook's death was written as accidental trauma during a disciplinary act. The county court ordered the plantation seized and its survivors relocated. But strange correspondence began circulating among local clergy. Letters stamped with wax and marked, "Eyes only." They spoke of an unnatural woman, a relic of the Nephilim bloodline, whose touch corrupted sanctified ground. The church sought to suppress these writings, but one archivist in Jackson kept copies, later found sealed inside his desk after his suicide. His final note read, "The daughter sleeps beneath the church floor. She dreams of freedom." Whether Mara survived, no one knew. Sightings surfaced for decades. A giant woman wandering near river crossings, cloaked and silent. Her presence coincided with droughts, dead cattle, and storms that moved against the wind. By the Civil War, Hollow's Edge was little more than a swamp of forgotten names. The townspeople avoided the old Claybrook ruins. And yet, the foundations of the new church, built in 1869, stood directly above them. Its cornerstone bore faint scratches, as if carved from within. Reverend Silas Morrow arrived at Hollow's Edge in 1887, a man of iron faith and unbending order. He came to cleanse the town's old soil and found the new church already heavy with rumor. Parishioners whispered of strange knocking beneath the floorboards, of the earth breathing during sermons. Morrow dismissed it as hysteria, but his sermons grew erratic, obsessed with the sins of giants and Eve's second betrayal. He began conducting late-night vigils alone, descending into the cellar with a lantern and his Bible. The sexton once followed him and claimed to hear weeping, slow, rhythmic, and enormous. When asked what he saw, the man left town the next day. In his final journal entry, Morrow wrote, "I have found the skull. It is too large for any coffin." A week later, the bells tolled 13 times. The Reverend was gone. The church sealed its basement, and Hollow's Edge fell into silence once more. But silence does not mean peace. Beneath the sanctified earth, something vast was stirring. In 1923, the Mississippi River flooded, tearing open a section of Hollow's Edge Cemetery. Coffins surfaced like forgotten memories, but one discovery silenced even the gravediggers. A skull nearly twice the size of a man's, its surface marked by strange indentations, as if a massive hand had once gripped it. Sheriff Porter ordered it destroyed, calling it a deformed ox bone. But two locals, brothers named Elias and Harlan Tibbet, took it before dawn. Within weeks, both were dead. One drowned in his well, the other found impaled on a fence post, his face frozen in terror. Their sister claimed they had planned to sell the skull to a traveling museum, but when she opened their trunk, it was empty. Only soil and the smell of rust remained. The townsfolk said Mara had returned to claim what was hers. But others believed the skull belonged not to her victim, but to her own father, the man crushed under the weight of a curse too ancient to name. After that flood, Hollow's Edge was never the same. The river shifted course, cutting the town in half, and the new bridge that replaced it would later collapse without warning. Survivors swore they heard screaming in the water, deep and slow, as if the river itself remembered. In 1932, a historian named Ruth Vanner stumbled upon Dr. Alaric Penn's medical ledger in a condemned courthouse archive. It was sealed in wax and bound with cloth, an artifact untouched by light for nearly a century. Within were notes on his work treating the enslaved at Claybrook Plantation. One entry stood apart, written in trembling ink. Subject, Mara. Height 6 feet 8 inches. Skin cold even under fire. No pulse found, yet movement persists. Flesh heals without scar. Further pages were soaked in something dark, blood or ink, it was impossible to tell. But the strangest entry came near the end. Her eyes mirror the storm. When she sleeps, the ground hums. Vanner presented her findings to the University of Mississippi, but the ledger vanished before it could be authenticated. Weeks later, she was found dead in her boarding room, her spine broken as though twisted by unseen hands. The university denied any involvement. Her papers, her typewriter, even her apartment furniture were burned in what officials called an accidental fire. But locals recalled a different sound that night, something heavy dragging across the roof, followed by 3 dull knocks on the door. No one opened it. By 1938, Hollow's Edge had nearly disappeared, reduced to an orphanage and a few scattered homes. The St. Elora Home for Girls stood atop the ruins of Claybrook's barn, though few knew its history. The matron, Sister Catherine, kept the girls in strict silence, forbidding talk of the scratching noises beneath the floor. But one child, 13-year-old Hazel Boone, began drawing strange figures, tall women with hollow eyes and broken crowns. Her sketches grew more violent each week. Then, one morning, Sister Catherine was found dead in the chapel, her skull caved in by blunt force. Hazel was missing. The sheriff organized a search party, but all they found were footprints, huge ones, leading from the chapel to the riverbank, then disappearing into the mud. A few nights later, the remaining girls awoke to distant singing, low, mournful, and impossibly deep. They said it was a lullaby in a language they didn't know. The orphanage closed within the year. Decades later, construction crews unearthing the foundation found bones, hundreds of them, arranged in a spiral beneath the chapel floor. The bones were small, all but one. In 1944, a WPA excavation crew arrived to map the area's old grave sites. The project supervisor, Thomas Greer, kept a private journal describing their discoveries. Coffin fragments, slave tags, and strange circular carvings etched into the bedrock. But on June 19th, he wrote something that was later redacted by the government. We uncovered a cavity under the church's foundation. Inside, a ribcage the size of a wagon. That night, his men refused to continue digging. Several claimed to have seen eyes, reflective, human yet wrong, shining from the hollow pit. Greer persisted alone, and the next morning the site was abandoned. His tent was shredded, his lantern crushed, and his journal drenched in water though it hadn't rained. All that remained legible were the words, "It was waiting for my name." When federal inspectors arrived weeks later, they declared the dig unsafe and sealed it with concrete. But locals said that on humid nights, the concrete sweated blood. By 1950, Hollow's Edge had become a ghost town, the last few residents long since driven out by drought, sickness, and superstition. Yet on October 12th, a freight engineer passing the derelict station reported seeing a woman on the tracks. Barefoot, enormous, wearing a dress that moved like river water. He sounded the whistle. She didn't flinch. When the train stopped, she was gone, leaving only a single handprint on the coal car, pressed deep into the steel. Days later, the river flooded again, carving through the cemetery and exposing fragments of old coffins. In the mud, searchers found bones, fresh ones with flesh still clinging. Experts said they belonged to a man in his 50s. His skull was crushed inward. Beneath him lay fragments of a woman's vertebrae, ancient, fossilized, and massive. No one claimed the remains. No one built there again. But every so often, on fog-thick mornings, fishermen still speak of a woman walking along the water's edge, her reflection too tall for the river to contain. In 1961, an archivist named Daniel Lorimer from Jackson University began cataloging what he called the Hollow's Edge materials, a forbidden box of microfilm, letters, and court transcriptions from the vanished town. One reel was labeled simply Mara/Claybrook, proof. When Lorimer screened it privately, he refused to describe what he saw. Colleagues recalled he emerged pale, muttering scripture under his breath. 3 days later, he mailed a confession to his mentor before hanging himself in his study. The letter arrived sealed in wax, identical to those old clergy files from the 1840s. In it, Lorimer wrote, "She was not human. Her body was an altar, and the church fed it with silence." He claimed the Church of St. Elora had used Mara's remains to sanctify the orphanage site, mixing her bones into the plaster of the walls to bind the curse. He warned that the binding had begun to fail. That night, the Jackson archives caught fire, an inferno so intense that reels of nitrate film burned blue. Nothing survived except Lorimer's letter and one half-melted frame of film showing what looked like a giant's hand gripping a child's cradle. By 1974, Hollow's Edge existed only in rumor and yellowed maps. But when Sheriff Walter Niles reopened the Claybrook file for a centennial exhibit, he uncovered an old crime ledger in his department's basement. Inside were testimonies from 1891, the year Reverend Morrow vanished. One account described a discovery by the sexton's son. There was a woman beneath the church, alive but sleeping, her skin hard like stone. The entry was unsigned, as if the writer feared reprisal. Niles grew obsessed, tracking down descendants of the church's founders. Most denied any connection. But one elderly woman, Eliza Horn, whispered before dying, "They built her prison out of faith." Within weeks, the sheriff disappeared. His cruiser was found abandoned near the collapsed bridge, headlights still on, engine cold. The ledger was never recovered. Only one photograph remained from his investigation, a shot of the bridge's underside, where someone had carved 3 words into the stone. I remember Claybrook. In the summer of 1983, an evangelical revival group held a crusade near the ruins of Hollow's Edge. They claimed to have reclaimed the haunted ground with prayer and fire. Their leader, Pastor Abram Holt, preached about purging the spirit of the giantess. Witnesses said the congregation trembled when the wind shifted. The tents groaned as if something enormous moved beneath the soil. Holt shouted scripture, demanding the demon reveal itself. Then all light failed. For 7 minutes, the camp was plunged into darkness. When the generators restarted, the ground was soaked with blood. Not from human wounds, but from the trees themselves, bleeding sap like crimson rain. Holt was found hours later on his knees before the altar. His jaw broken, eyes wide open. On his chest, carved into the flesh, were 3 deep letters, M.A.R. His surviving followers left the ministry within a month. No one ever found the tents recording reels, though the local paper swore to have heard them once. Voices whispering in reverse, a woman's laughter hidden inside the static. In 1995, cultural anthropologist Dr. Simone Crane began investigating rural myths of female giants in Reconstruction-era Mississippi. Her trail led her to Hollow's Edge, where she discovered the few surviving families still refused to speak. They burned her mail, refused interviews, and warned, "That name brings storms." Crane persisted, unearthing an oral history from a former orphanage servant, then 96 years old, who claimed the nuns fed the floorboards blood every Easter. The woman described the matron whispering to the cracks, "Keep her dreaming, keep her bound." Crane recorded the interview on reel-to-reel tape, but when she replayed it, the voice that answered her question wasn't the old woman's. It was low, deep, and distant, saying only, "I never slept." She published fragments in an academic journal before vanishing en route to Jackson. Her car was found submerged in a flooded ditch. The tape recorder was still playing, looping the same sentence again and again. She remembers the taste of the whip. In 2002, a fisherman named Caleb Jory submitted photographs to the Mississippi Historical Society, showing a strange figure rising from the fog along the riverbank. The shape was impossibly tall, shoulders broad, eyes reflecting the camera flash like molten glass. Authorities dismissed them as doctored. But the negatives told another story: no manipulation, just water damage. 2 weeks after his submission, Jory disappeared. His boat was later found wedged beneath the old Claybrook Bridge. On its hull, carved deep by a knife or nail, were the words, "She is walking." Divers found nothing but black silt and animal bones. Yet that same week, towns along the lower river reported their wells turning red, metallic, unfit to drink. A priest from Vicksburg declared it a plague of sin. But a few locals remembered something older. An ancient verse from a slave song passed through generations. "When the daughter drinks, the river drowns the land." The river rose another 6 feet that night. In 2009, an amateur documentarian named Peter Lasker began recording interviews for a film he called Forgotten Giants of the South. When he reached Hollow's Edge, locals refused him entry past the river. One night, he crossed anyway, setting up a camera in the remains of the church. The footage was found a month later, waterlogged and distorted, but partially recoverable. It begins with Lasker narrating, his flashlight cutting through fog. At exactly 2:17 a.m., the audio spikes. A low hum fills the air, followed by the unmistakable sound of something dragging across stone. Then a voice, female, deep, resonant, whispering, "The chain breaks." The camera shakes violently before collapsing. In the final frame, a massive shadow eclipses the doorway, taller than the beams. Experts dismissed it as a hoax, but sound analysts found an anomaly. Beneath Lasker's breathing was a heartbeat, slow, heavy, and not human. His remains were never recovered. Only the tape survived, sealed in an evidence locker in Jackson, where technicians still report static bursts every year on its anniversary. Always the same 3 words repeated backward, "I am awake." In 2015, Hollow's Edge was declared an environmental hazard after a wildfire consumed its last standing structures. Officials blamed lightning, but witnesses swore the storm came after the flames. Satellite images captured something extraordinary. The fire spread outward in a perfect spiral, beginning precisely at the site of the old Claybrook Church. Investigators who entered the ashes found no remains of wood or stone, only fused clay and a massive, human-shaped depression in the ground. In its center lay a cross of melted iron, half sunk into the soil. Nearby, a local teenager filming the blaze caught a brief, chilling frame, a silhouette walking calmly through the smoke, enormous and unburned. When shown the footage, the fire chief resigned the next day. The official report classified the fire as non-reproducible atmospheric combustion, but the smell of iron lingered in the air for months. In 2018, a fringe religious group calling themselves the Hollow Revival Society began circulating online footage of rituals performed in the name of the daughter. They claimed Mara was the divine correction, a manifestation of human vengeance against centuries of cruelty. In the videos, masked figures read from burned Bible pages, mixing blood and river water in bowls shaped like skulls. Authorities traced the group to abandoned properties near the Mississippi Delta, but every site was found empty, filled with crude murals of a giant woman lifting chains from her wrists. One chilling clip showed the society gathered around a pit, chanting, "She walks among the silenced." As the camera panned, a colossal handprint appeared in the mud behind them, fresh and dripping. The FBI removed the footage, citing digital tampering. Yet a forensic technician later confessed that the frame rate of the clip was impossible, recorded at a pulse rhythm, not mechanical speed. The group vanished. Their symbol, a crown made of nails, was later found carved into courthouse doors across the state. In 2023, a journalist named Annabelle Crow conducted the last known investigation into Hollow's Edge. Her final audio recording, recovered from her car, captures a trembling voice describing what she saw beyond the levee. It's her. She's not ghost, not flesh. She's memory made form. Crow describes the earth moving like breath, the river parting around a figure whose eyes held every century of pain ever buried in the South. The recording ends with her whisper, "She remembers us all." Her vehicle was found the next day submerged in the floodplain, the interior filled with black silt. Her body was never located, but her recorder remained dry. When forensic audio specialists cleaned the track, they uncovered a second voice layered beneath hers. Female, resonant, repeating the same line 3 times, "Freedom has a body." Today, Hollow's Edge exists only as a ripple on the Mississippi, a ghost of land erased by flood and time. Fishermen still avoid the bend where the current turns cold without warning. They say the water hums there, low, steady, like a pulse. No one speaks her name anymore, yet every few years the river gives something back. A piece of chain, a crushed skull, a scrap of linen as white as bone. Historians dismiss it all as coincidence, superstition, decay. But the old songs still remember, the ones whispered by descendants of those who once labored under Claybrook's shadow. They say she waits for the world to look again, to admit what it buried, that she was not monster but mirror, that the hand which crushed her master's skull was the same hand that held generations' grief in its palm. Beneath the water, the hum grows louder each spring. Some call it the current. Others know better. It is the sound of a promise unbroken. The sound of Goliath's daughter, breathing once more beneath the American soil.